The silenced pistol felt like an extension of my hand, the recoil a familiar heartbeat. Senator Fairbanks, or what was left of him, slumped against the mahogany desk, a crimson stain blossoming on the priceless Persian rug. Another masterpiece, another ghost added to my collection. Clean, I murmured into my calm, the word barely a breath. These guys paid top dollar for discretion, and I was the Michelangelo of making problems disappear. A clipped response crackled back. Package secured. Rendezvous Alpha 7. Standard procedure. I holstered the weapon, already moving, a phantom in the opulent study. Years of this, it was second nature. In and out, no trace, no witnesses, just another night, another notch on my very expensive belt. You get a reputation in this business, a certain respect. People whispered the name Killian Graves like a prayer or a curse, depending on which side of the barrel you were on. Alpha 7 was my usual extraction point, a discreet penthouse suite overlooking the city. I'd built this place from the ground up. Every security measure, every escape route. A fortress designed to keep me safe, or so I thought. The elevator hummed, the doors sliding open with a soft whoosh. Something felt off. Too quiet. The air in the penthouse was still, heavy, not carrying the usual faint scent of ozone from the air purification system. A single lamp was overturned near the bar, a shard of crystal glinting on the floor. My hand instinctively went to the pistol beneath my jacket. This wasn't right. This was never right. "Relax, Killian," a voice drawled from the shadows. "We just wanted to have a little chat." My blood turned to ice. I knew that voice. 5 figures emerged, silhouetted against the city lights. Faces I knew, faces I'd trusted. My own damn crew. Marcus, with his cold, calculating eyes. Isabella, her hand steady on a nasty-looking automatic. Even young Reese, who I'd practically mentored, looked at me with a chilling detachment. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice betraying none of the shock that was ripping through me. Years of training kept my face a mask, even as my gut twisted with a sickening sense of betrayal. They closed in, weapons trained. Marcus stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He was always the ambitious one, the one hungry for power. "It's simple, Killian. You've become inconvenient, a liability. You know too much, you hold too much sway. The council decided a change was necessary." "The council?" I spat the word. These backstabbing cowards hid behind a council? A hail of gunfire erupted. I dove for cover, the penthouse exploding in a symphony of shattering glass and ripping fabric. I returned fire, years of instinct taking over. 2 down, but they were too many, too close. A bullet grazed my arm. Another slammed into my chest, sending a jolt of searing pain through me. I stumbled, my back against the burning remains of what was a custom-designed armored window minutes ago. Marcus stood over me, his gun smoking. "A shame, Killian. You were the best. But even ghosts can be put down." He raised his weapon for the final shot. The room seemed to tilt, the city lights blurring. I had to buy myself time, or at least understand. "Why, Marcus?" I asked between gasps of pain, noticing the gasoline canisters next to the window and the flickers of flame coming from it. He smiled coldly. "Let's just say I'm tired of playing second fiddle." The world exploded in fire and pain. My last thought, a bitter curse, was that I never saw it coming. Then only darkness. My eyes snapped open. "Where?" My head throbbed, a dull ache behind my eyes. I was lying on a narrow bed, in a room bathed in the weak gray light of early morning. It wasn't the penthouse, not even close. This was small, cramped. Cheap wallpaper peeling at the corners, a rickety dresser, a single, dusty window overlooking a brick wall. I sat up, wincing. My body felt Wrong. Weak. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet landing on a threadbare rug. My hands, they were smaller, less scarred. I staggered to a cracked mirror hanging on the back of the door. A stranger stared back at me. Younger, much younger. Gone were the hard lines etched by years of violence, the cold, calculating glint in the eyes. This face was softer, almost innocent. But the eyes held a flicker of something familiar, a ghost of the man I had been, or would be. Panic clawed at my throat. What the hell was going on? I touched my face, tracing the smooth line of my jaw, the unfamiliar curve of my cheekbones. My reflexes were sluggish, my movements clumsy. I tried to clench my fist, a pathetic display of strength. My gaze fell on a cheap plastic-covered ID card lying on the dresser. Killian Graves, it read, along with an address that meant absolutely nothing to me. Below it, a date. 17 years before the night I'd died. 17 years. I stumbled back, collapsing onto the bed. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the evidence was staring me in the face. The reflection in the mirror, the ID, the unfamiliar weakness of my body. I remembered the fire, the bullets, Marcus's smug face. I remembered dying. I rifled through the drawers of the dresser, finding more pieces of a life I didn't recognize. Old photos of a smiling, carefree kid, me, apparently, with friends I'd never met. Family I didn't remember. A dog-eared journal, filled with the naive, hopeful scribblings of a teenager dreaming of… what? A normal life? A pathetic, ordinary existence? The irony was almost enough to make me laugh. A harsh, bitter sound in the quiet room. I slammed the journal shut. This wasn't a dream. This was a second chance. A twisted, impossible gift. I'd been given back my life, but not the life I knew. I was a nobody, a kid stripped of my skills, my power, my reputation. But I still had my mind. The mind of a killer. The mind of a man who knew exactly who his enemies were and how they would rise to power. The despair that had threatened to engulf me began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard fury. They thought they'd killed me. They thought they'd erased me. They were wrong. This time I wouldn't be caught off guard. This time I wouldn't be betrayed. This time I'd be the one pulling the strings. This time I would be the one everyone feared, even Marcus. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about control. This was about building an empire from the ashes of my former life, and I had 17 years to do it. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Game on. Dawn. Still not used to waking up to that instead of the blackout curtains of my penthouse. My body felt like lead, every muscle protesting. Yesterday's exploration had been a rude awakening. Time for another one. I started with the basics, push-ups. My old routine used to be 200, easy. Now I struggled to reach 20. 20! My arms trembled, and I collapsed, panting, onto the dusty floor. Pathetic, I muttered, disgust lacing my voice. But something was there. Underneath the weakness, the unfamiliar awkwardness, a flicker of memory, muscle memory, the ghost of the killer I used to be. It was like trying to play a familiar song on an out-of-tune instrument. I tried a few basic combat moves, kicks, blocks, punches. Slow, clumsy, lacking the precision and power I was used to. But the form was there, buried deep. It was like my body remembered, even if it couldn't quite execute. This wasn't going to be easy, but it wasn't impossible. It was going to take time and a hell of a lot of pain. The physical stuff was frustrating, but the mental game? That was still sharp. I needed information. No internet searches in this era, though. No handy databases to hack. I had to go old school. The local library became my new haunt. Stacks of old newspapers, city directories, dusty archives. It was tedious, but I was a patient man. I was hunting for the seeds of the organization that would eventually become my enemy, for the names and faces that would one day be on my hit list. I started piecing things together. The council, Marcus had mentioned, they weren't some new entity. They had roots in this city going back decades. Family names kept popping up. Romano, Valerius, Moreau, the power players of the underworld, even back then. I found articles about their legitimate businesses, their charitable contributions, the carefully crafted facade they presented to the world. And then I started finding the younger versions. Marcus Valerius, a cocky, ambitious college student, already showing signs of the ruthlessness that would define him. Isabella Romano, a sharp-tongued debutante with a reputation for getting what she wanted. Reese, he was harder to find. Just a kid then, barely a blip on the radar. It was like looking at a photo album of my future killers, seeing them before they became monsters. Or perhaps seeing the monsters they always were, just in their larval stage. A plan began to form, a long-term strategy woven from threads of information and fueled by a cold, burning desire for revenge. This wasn't just about getting even. This was about dismantling their entire world, brick by brick. I would become their ghost, their unseen puppeteer. I closed my eyes. The faces of my future enemies burned into my memory. "You won't see me coming," I whispered, the words a vow, a promise. "I won't just survive. I'll conquer, all of you." The next few months were a blur of pain, sweat, and frustration. Every morning, before the city woke up, I was in the park, pushing my young body to its breaking point, running until my lungs burned, doing pull-ups on rusty playground equipment, practicing my strikes against a battered old tree. It was brutal. My muscles screamed, my joints ached, and my teenage body protested every step of the way. But I didn't relent. I channeled the memory of the killer I had been, the effortless power, the lethal grace. I visualized every move, every strike, forcing my clumsy limbs to obey. Slowly, agonizingly, the muscle memory began to return. The ghost was taking shape. I needed money, though. Not just for food and rent, but for resources, information, contacts, the tools of my trade. I couldn't exactly apply for a job at the local burger joint. I found my solution in a dingy, smoke-filled pool hall on the wrong side of town. Fast Eddie's. The name was as subtle as a brick to the face. I'd always had a knack for games of skill, and pool was a game of angles, strategy, and controlled aggression. It was perfect. I started small, hustling a few bucks here and there, pretending to be just another cocky kid with a lucky streak. But my skills, honed over years of high-stakes gambling in my past life, quickly became apparent. I could read my opponents, predict their moves, control the table. The money started flowing. More importantly, Fast Eddie's was a crossroads for the city's underbelly. Low-level thugs, bookies, informants, the kind of people who knew things. I listened, I observed, I learned. I was building my network, one game, one whispered conversation at a time. I started taking on small jobs, nothing that would attract too much attention. Collections, mostly. Persuading people to pay their debts. It was dirty work, but it kept me sharp, and it gave me a taste of the power I craved. It also gave me a glimpse into the operations of my future enemies. One night I was sent to collect from a small-time bookie who was skimming from the Romano family. The bookie was a nervous wreck, sweating and stammering excuses. But behind him, in the shadows of the back room, I saw someone else. A young man, maybe my age, with a cold, calculating gaze. Lean build, expensive suit, an aura of barely controlled violence. "You're late, Benny," the young man said, his voice smooth as silk, but with an edge of steel. It was him, a younger version of Marcus Valerius. Benny, the bookie, groveled. "Mr. Valerius, I swear I was just about to—" Marcus cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Excuses are boring. My father has a little patience for incompetence." I stepped forward, playing the role of the eager, slightly intimidated enforcer. "I'm here to collect, Mr. Valerius. From Benny." Marcus looked me over, his eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "Just a messenger," I said, injecting a hint of deference into my voice. "A new recruit." He smirked. "Eager to prove yourself, are you?" "Yes, sir," I said, meeting his gaze. "Very eager." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good. Ambition is a valuable asset. Don't disappoint me." It was me suppressing a laugh this time, as I thought, "Oh, I won't disappoint. You have no idea." The encounter was brief, but it was a turning point. I'd planted a seed. I was on his radar, a face he might remember, a ghost already haunting his future. And I was just getting started. Joining the Romano family wasn't the Godfather fantasy some might imagine. No secret oaths in candlelit rooms, just a grimy warehouse on the docks and a lot of shouting. "All right, you maggots!" bellowed a mountain of a man with a voice like gravel. This was Sal DeMarco before his accident, the one I would orchestrate later. "You think you got what it takes to be Romanos? We'll see about that." The initiation was a brutal free-for-all. We, the hopeful recruits, were thrown into a makeshift ring, more like a roped-off section of concrete floor, and told to fight. No rules, just pain. I saw the fear in the other guy's eyes. Young, desperate, trying to look tougher than they were. I almost pitied them. Almost. I let a kid with a busted lip land a clumsy punch on my jaw. I stumbled back, making it look good. "Come on, pretty boy," he sneered, emboldened. "That all you got?" I let him get another one in then, with a speed he clearly wasn't expecting, I countered. A quick jab to the solar plexus, a sweep of the leg, and he was down. I didn't pound him into the ground, though, just enough to win. The mountain, whose name I later learned was Big Tony, grunted. "You? Graves. You got a mean streak, I like that. But can you follow orders?" "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my voice even, respectful. "Whatever it takes." Inside, I was smirking. Whatever it takes, indeed. The next few months were an exercise in patience and subtle manipulation. I was the errand boy, the gopher, the guy who cleaned up the messes, literally and figuratively. But I was also a sponge, soaking up information. The Romanos used a local bar, the Velvet Curtain, as a front. I got myself assigned there, polishing glasses, clearing tables, and, most importantly, listening. "Did you hear about Vitale's crew?" I'd say casually to one of the regulars, a low-level enforcer named Frankie. "They're pushing into our territory down by the docks. Heard they're muscling in on the protection rackets." Frankie, a man who loved to gossip, would take the bait. "Those Vitale bastards, they got no respect. Someone ought to teach them a lesson." Another time, I'd accidentally leave a crumpled note on the boss's desk, a note I'd carefully crafted myself hinting at a double cross by one of his lieutenants. "Boss," I'd say, feigning innocence. "I found this on the floor. I didn't read it, of course, but it looked important." The boss, a man named Don Angelo, would snatch the note, his eyes narrowing. He'd never suspect the lowly cleaner. He'd be too busy suspecting his own men. Then there was Reese. He was assigned to the same crew as me, doing the same grunt work. He was surprisingly normal. "You ever wonder if this is all worth it, Killian?" he asked one night, over cheap beer at a dive bar. I shrugged, playing it cool. It's a living, right? Better than working in a factory. Yeah, but sometimes I think about getting out, going straight, you know? I looked at him. This kid who would one day betray me. And for a fleeting moment I felt something. Pity? Regret? Don't be stupid, Reese, I said, forcing a laugh. Where else are you going to get this kind of excitement? This kind of money that I needed. He sighed. I guess you're right. My masterstroke of manipulation involved the Romanos' upcoming shipment of, well, let's just call it contraband. I knew Marcus Valerius was itching to make a move against them. I started dropping hints. To the Romanos, I'd overhear a phone call, muttering about Valerius sniffing around and a possible ambush. To Marcus's crew, I'd let slip that the Romanos were planning something big and expecting trouble. I made sure both sides had just enough information to be paranoid, but not enough to see the whole picture. The result was a bloodbath. The two crews clashed at the docks, each convinced the other was trying to screw them. I watched from a safe distance, hidden in the shadows, as my carefully laid plans unfolded. Looks like we got a rat problem, Don Angelo growled, surveying the carnage. I kept my head down, my face a mask of innocent concern. Terrible, boss. Just terrible. Inside, I was celebrating. Sal DeMarco had to go. He was a liability, a loose cannon, and, frankly, an obstacle to my long-term plans. Plus, watching him bully his way with the new recruits before got on my nerves. Hey, Sal, I said casually, one Tuesday afternoon, as he was preparing to leave for his weekly gambling session. Heard there's a new high roller in town. Might be worth checking out. DeMarco, always eager for easy money, grinned. Thanks for the tip, kid. Maybe I'll win enough to buy you a drink. I'll hold you to that, I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. That night, I followed him to the gambling den in Little Italy. I'd already scouted the location, planned my escape route. I wore a nondescript coat, a hat pulled low, a fake mustache I'd bought at a costume shop. I waited in the shadows across the street, watching as he swaggered out of the den, pockets presumably full of someone else's money. Hey, Sal, I called out, pitching my voice to sound unfamiliar. He turned, squinting in the darkness. Who's there? That was his last mistake. A silenced pistol, 2 shots to the head. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. I was gone before the echo faded. The news of DeMarco's death spread like wildfire. The Romanos were enraged, demanding answers. Who would dare? Don Angelo roared at a meeting the next day. This was a professional hit. Find out who did this. I stood quietly in the corner, blending in with the other low-level grunts. Maybe it was the Valerius crew, I suggested, feigning concern. They've been looking for any excuse to start a war. The suggestion fueled the existing tensions, diverting suspicion away from me. The whispers began. A new killer, a ghost, operating in the shadows. I continued my campaign, eliminating threats with surgical precision. A corrupt judge, a rival enforcer, a double-dealing informant, each death carefully planned, each one furthering my agenda. Another one bites the dust, I'd murmur to myself after each successful hit, the ghost of a smile playing on my lips. I used different methods, different disguises. Sometimes a knife in a crowded street, sometimes poison in a drink, sometimes a carefully staged accident. No patterns, no connections. Meanwhile, I was building my own power base. The money I was earning from the pool hall, the collections, and my freelance work was being carefully invested. I bought a small, struggling bar, a laundromat, a few other legitimate businesses. Fronts, of course, but also sources of clean money and valuable contacts. Then came the close call. Tony the Knife Moretti, one of Don Angelo's oldest and most trusted capos, started getting suspicious. You're a quick learner, kid. he said to me one day, his eyes narrowed, studying me like a hawk. Too quick, maybe? Just trying to do my best, Mr. Moretti, I replied, keeping my voice respectful. You ask a lot of questions, too, he continued, his voice low and menacing. Too many questions. My heart beat a little faster, but I didn't let it show. Just trying to learn the ropes, sir. There's something about you I don't trust, Graves, he said, leaning in close, his breath smelling of stale cigars. I'm gonna be watching you. I knew I had to act. Moretti was too sharp, too experienced. He was a threat I couldn't ignore. I spent 2 days following Moretti, at a distance, learning his habits. He liked his whores and his cards, and made sure to visit the same whorehouse every Friday. I arranged a meeting with him, a fake tip about a lucrative deal. I heard about something big going down, I told him over the phone, disguising my voice. Big enough to make you a very rich man. He took the bait. Meet me at the docks, Pier 17, midnight. Come alone. He arrived alone, just as I'd expected. He was cautious, but greed outweighed his suspicion. All right, kid, he growled, stepping out of his car. What's this big score you're talking about? He never saw the garrote. I came up behind him, swift and silent. It was over in seconds. I dumped the body in the river, watching as it sank beneath the murky water. One less problem, I muttered, turning and walking away, a ghost disappearing into the night. The message was clear. No one was untouchable. The shadow had claimed another victim, and it was just getting started. 7 years? 7 years of planning, plotting, and patiently pulling strings. I wasn't the scared, weak kid who'd woken up in that crummy apartment anymore. I wasn't quite the lethal weapon I'd once been, physically, but my mind was sharper than ever. And I'd reshaped the Romano family in my image, without them even realizing it. The organization was a snake pit of rivalries, and I was the snake charmer. DeMarco was gone, of course, so was Moretti, and so were a dozen others, all carefully selected, all eliminated in ways that pointed fingers everywhere but at me. Some had died in accidents, others in turf wars, others simply disappeared. The key players, my future betrayers, were still alive, but their positions had shifted. Marcus Valerius, once a rising star, was now bogged down in a bitter feud with the remnants of the DeMarco crew, his ambitions constantly thwarted. Isabella Romano, once the untouchable princess, had been discredited by a series of scandals. Scandals I'd carefully orchestrated, of course. Reese was still around, still surprisingly loyal to the Romanos, but I'd managed to keep him at arm's length. Useful, but not too influential. This damn war with the Valerius crew is bleeding us dry, Don Angelo grumbled during one of our weekly meetings. I was now one of his trusted advisors, a position I'd earned through a combination of feigned loyalty and carefully manufactured successes. It's a distraction, Don, I said, my voice calm and measured. A waste of resources. We need to focus on the bigger picture. And what's the bigger picture, Killian? Isabella snapped. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She'd always been wary of me, sensing something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Expansion, I replied smoothly. New markets, new opportunities. We're letting petty squabbles blind us to the real prize. My words were carefully chosen, designed to appeal to their greed, their ambition. I knew how to play them, how to push their buttons. The time had come for the final act. I'd spent years setting the stage, and now it was time to trigger the climax. It was a complex plan, a multi-layered scheme involving forged documents, planted evidence, and carefully timed betrayals. I started by leaking information to Marcus, suggesting that Don Angelo was planning to make a move against him, to wipe out the Valerius family once and for all. I used a burner phone, a disguised voice, and a series of dead drops, all techniques I'd perfected over the years. "Valerius," I hissed into the phone, "Angelo's planning to hit you. Tonight. He's tired of the war. He wants you gone." Then, I did the same to Don Angelo, feeding him false intelligence about a planned Valerius attack on his headquarters. "Don," I said, feigning urgency, "I overheard some of Marcus's men talking. They're planning something big, tonight. They're coming for you." The seeds of paranoia were sown. Both sides were on high alert, expecting an attack. All I needed was a spark. That spark came in the form of a carefully orchestrated ambush. I hired a group of mercenaries, unaffiliated with either family, to attack a neutral location, a warehouse used by both the Romanos and the Valeriuses for storage. I made sure both sides got tipped off about the attack, blaming the other. The result was chaos. A full-blown war erupted in the streets, a bloody ballet of bullets and betrayal. The Romanos and the Valeriuses tore each other apart, each convinced the other had started it. "They're hitting us everywhere," one of Don Angelo's lieutenants shouted, panicked during a frantic phone call. "We're losing men." "Retaliate," Don Angelo roared. "Show them no mercy." I watched from the shadows, a ghost in the machine, as my plan unfolded. It was a symphony of destruction, and I was the conductor. I used the chaos to eliminate several more key figures. A sniper shot here, a car bomb there, each death attributed to the ongoing conflict. My future betrayers were falling like dominoes, their deaths blamed on their rivals. Reese, caught in the crossfire, took a bullet to the shoulder. I found him bleeding out in an alley, his face pale with shock. "Killian," he gasped, reaching for me. "Help me!" For a moment, I hesitated. A flicker of something, but it was gone in an instant. "I'll get help," I said, my voice cold. I pressed a cloth to his wound, making a show of trying to stop the bleeding. But I knew it was too late. I had orchestrated too perfect of an attack. He gave me one last pained look before his light was snuffed out. The organization was crumbling. Don Angelo, paranoid and desperate, was holed up in his mansion, surrounded by his few remaining loyal men. Marcus Valerius was in a similar situation, his forces depleted, his empire in ruins. They were both looking for a way out, a way to survive, and they were both completely unaware that the architect of their destruction was standing right beside them. The ghost was about to reveal himself. The remnants of the Romano leadership were gathered in Don Angelo's opulent, but now heavily guarded, study. Fear hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. They were like cornered rats, snapping at each other, desperate for answers. "It's the Valerius crew," one of them insisted, his voice trembling. "They're behind all of this. They've been planning it for years." "No," another argued. "It's someone else. Someone bigger. A foreign power, maybe. The Russians? The Chinese?" They were grasping at straws, their theories growing more outlandish by the minute. They couldn't or wouldn't see the truth. "It's neither," I said, my voice cutting through their panicked chatter. They all turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "What do you mean, Killian?" Don Angelo asked. His eyes narrowed. I stepped forward, into the light. "It's me," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm the one who's been pulling the strings." A stunned silence filled the room. They looked at me, at the man they'd trusted, the man they'd considered one of their own, and they couldn't comprehend what I was saying. "You?" Isabella scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Killian. You're just a ghost?" I finished her sentence. "That's what they're calling me, aren't they? The ghost who's been tearing your world apart." I started to pace, enjoying their confusion, their growing fear. "You all thought you were so smart, so powerful. You thought you controlled the underworld, but you were just puppets, dancing to my tune. I began to target them directly, one by one. I used my knowledge of their weaknesses, their secrets, their fears. "Don Angelo," I said, turning to the aging patriarch. "You remember that shipment of heroin you intercepted 10 years ago? The one that made you a millionaire? I arranged that. I also arranged for your rivals to find out about it, sparking a war that cost you half your territory." Don Angelo's face turned ashen. You did that?" "And Isabella," I continued, turning to the woman who had always suspected me. "That little scandal with the mayor's son, the one that ruined your reputation, that was me, too. A few well-placed photos, a few anonymous phone calls. It's amazing how easily people can be manipulated." Isabella stared at me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You're a monster." "Perhaps," I said, shrugging, "but a very effective one." Panic began to set in. They realized they were trapped, facing an enemy they couldn't understand, an enemy who knew all their secrets. Who are you?" one of the remaining lieutenants stammered. I stopped pacing, standing directly in front of Don Angelo. "Don't you recognize me, Don?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Think back. 17 years ago. A burning building. A betrayal." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a wave of pure terror. Killian Graves?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But you're dead. We killed you." "Did you?" I smiled, a cold, chilling smile. "Death is overrated. Let's just say I got a second chance. A chance to settle the score." I let the silence hang in the air, savoring their fear. Then, I pulled out a small, engraved lighter, the same lighter I'd carried in my past life, a memento of my former self. "This is for Marcus," I said, my voice hardening. "For Isabella, for all of you." I flicked the lighter open, the small flame reflecting in their terrified eyes. It was a signal to the few loyal men I'd kept hidden, the ones who had helped me orchestrate this entire charade. The doors burst open, and my men stormed in, weapons drawn. The remaining Romano loyalists were quickly disarmed, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Killian," Don Angelo pleaded, his voice trembling, "what are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish what you started," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I'm going to erase you. All of you? But not yet. I had one more piece of theater planned." I turned to one of my men. "Bring him in." A moment later, a bound and gagged figure was dragged into the room. It was Marcus Valerius, bruised, battered, and terrified. I'd captured him myself, a personal touch. I removed the gag from his mouth. "Marcus," I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Look who's here, your old friends, the Romanos." Marcus stared at me, his eyes filled with hatred and confusion. You did this? You set us up?" I laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You have no idea." I turned back to Don Angelo. "I want you to watch, Don. I want you to see what happens when you betray someone. I want you to see your empire crumble." This was the beginning of the end, the ultimate revenge. The ghost had returned. I chose the location carefully. The penthouse suite, Alpha 7, the place where it all ended, and where it would all begin again. The place had been rebuilt, of course, after the fire. But the layout was the same, the view the same. It was a perfect stage for my final act. Don Angelo was brought in, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. My men had cleared out the place, leaving only the furniture I'd requested. A single chair facing the panoramic window overlooking the city. I had Angelo placed in it. I removed the gag. He coughed, his voice hoarse. "Killian, What is this? What do you want?" "I want you to see," I said, gesturing to the city lights spread out before us. "I want you to see what you built, what you lost, and what I've taken." He stared at me, his face a mask of confusion and fear. He still didn't fully understand. He still thought he was dealing with a rival, a disgruntled employee, anything but me. You're working for the Valerius family?" he stammered. "Is that it? We can make a deal, Killian. I can pay you more than they ever could." I laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You still don't get it, do you, Dawn? This isn't about money. This isn't about power. This is about justice." He tried to stand, but his bonds held him fast. "Justice? You call this justice? You're a murderer, Killian, a traitor?" "And what were you, Dawn?" I asked, my voice turning icy. "You and your council. You thought you were untouchable. You thought you could play God, deciding who lived and who died." I circled him slowly, like a predator toying with its prey. "You made a mistake, Dawn. You crossed the wrong man. You killed the wrong man." He struggled against his bonds, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. There was none. "I don't understand," he whispered. Who are you?" I stopped in front of him, leaning in close, my face inches from his. "Look at me, Dawn," I said softly. "Look into my eyes. Do you see anything familiar?" He stared at me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a wave of utter terror. "No, it can't be." "It is," I said, my voice a low growl. "Killian Graves. Remember me?" He started to shake his head, denial warring with the undeniable truth. You're dead. We killed you, in this very room." I smiled, a chilling, mirthless smile. "You tried to kill me. You burned me, shot me, left me for dead. But I survived, or perhaps I came back. Does it matter?" I straightened up, pacing again. "I spent 17 years in the shadows, Dawn. 17 years planning, plotting, waiting for this moment. I infiltrated your organization, turned your allies against you, destroyed everything you built." He was sobbing now, tears streaming down his face. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Why?" I stopped, turning to face him, my voice filled with a cold fury. "Because you betrayed me. You took my life, my future, everything. You and your precious council, you decided I was expendable. You made me a ghost." I pulled out the pistol, the same one I'd used to kill Senator Fairbanks all those years ago. It felt familiar, comfortable in my hand. "You killed me once, Dawn," I said, my voice low and menacing. "Now I'm here to return the favor." He closed his eyes, his body trembling. He was broken, defeated. He knew it was over. He was going to die at the hands of the ghost he'd created. The shot echoed through the penthouse, a single, sharp report. It was done. It was over. But there was no sense of triumph, no feeling of catharsis, just emptiness. A hollow ache in my chest. Revenge hadn't brought back my old life. It hadn't erased the pain, the betrayal. It had just ended it. The underworld was mine. With Don Angelo and Marcus Valerius gone, and their organizations shattered, there was no one left to challenge me. I stepped out of the shadows, no longer a ghost, but a king. The transition was swift, brutal, and efficient. Any remaining resistance was crushed. I consolidated my power, absorbing the remnants of the Romano and Valerius families, forging a new empire from the ashes of the old. But I wasn't interested in ruling the same way they had. I wasn't interested in petty squabbles, turf wars, and senseless violence. I wanted order, control. I established new rules, new hierarchies. I demanded loyalty, but I also offered protection, stability. I invested in legitimate businesses, diversified my holdings. created a system that was less reliant on brute force and more on strategic alliances. I even implemented a code of conduct, a set of guidelines that governed the underworld. No dealing with children, no unnecessary violence against civilians, no betrayals without consequences. It was ironic, perhaps, coming from a man who had built his empire on betrayal, but it was necessary. I was building something that would last, something more than just a criminal enterprise. The whispers started again, but this time they were different. They spoke of Killian Graves, the man who had died and come back to life. The man who had single-handedly dismantled the old order and forged a new one. He was killed once, they'd say, their voices hushed with awe and fear. And yet he walks among us. I became a legend, a myth, a cautionary tale. The ghost had become a king, but the crown was heavy. I was surrounded by people I couldn't trust, constantly watching my back, always looking for the next threat. I was the most powerful man in the underworld, but I was also alone. I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse, overlooking the city that was now mine. The lights twinkled below, a vast, sprawling tapestry of human lives. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to do. I'd avenged my death, conquered my enemies, built an empire. But at what cost? I looked at my reflection in the glass, at the hard lines of my face, the cold, calculating glint in my eyes. I'd prevented my own death, but in doing so, I'd become the very thing I once despised. I'd become a ruler of darkness. A sudden noise behind me made me turn, my hand instinctively going to the weapon I always carried. It was just one of my men, bringing me a report. "Boss," he said, his voice respectful but wary. "There's been a development, a new player in town. They call themselves the Serpent." A new threat? Of course. The game never ended. The cycle of violence, of power, of betrayal would continue. A flicker of something, anticipation? Resignation? Crossed my face. I was the king, and the king had to defend his throne. Perhaps this was my fate. To rule this world of shadows, forever haunted by the ghost of the man I used to be. The game goes on, and there's always a new player. But they'd learn, just like the others. They'd learn to fear the name Killian Graves. The story ends, but for Killian, the reign has just begun. And he accepted it with a cold smile.